So, hello and welcome back yet again. We're going to be recapping another chapter of the Phoenix Transformed, but probably a little bit scatterbrained. I don't usually get political on this channel, but it was a very long night last night, and hugs to anybody that needs it today. I spent some time hugging my cat, and I think I'm going to walk outside and just enjoy nature here in a little while. But before I do that, since I didn't get this done last night because I was way too much online, it's time to jump back in and see what's going on in a much nicer, to me anyway, well, okay, this one particularly might not be the most nice world to be in at the moment, but fantasy worlds are generally a place that I retreat to quite often. um Although, like I said, right now in the Phoenix Transformed, it's not really a world I would voluntarily like shoot myself into, considering it's pretty darn miserable there at the moment. Um, if you remember in the last chapter that we recapped, the Aramethans that Harrier rescued are very ungrateful, very demanding, and very people I wouldn't want to be around right now because I'd probably smack them upside the head. And I'm kind of surprised that Harrier hasn't, even though one of them is his brother. Tercel is being a fairly typical of Tercel and trying to keep the peace. The Isvi people are just about fed up to here with the Aramethans, and they've only known them a day. So with tensions wrapping up, or ramping up, not wrapping up, we're going to jump in, and this one's going to be, I'm probably going to be reading rather heavily and quoting rather heavily from this chapter because there's a lot in it. I feel like there's a lot in all of them. So we're going to be jumping back into my recap of chapter 14 of The Phoenix Transformed by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, and chapter 14 is titled Clash of Wills. So yeah, like I said, we left off on the last chapter with Harrier just being like, you know what? I'm the one that's in charge, and we're leaving now. Get on your showtars or walk. I don't care. And he just turned and left them. And this doesn't really sit incredibly well with Tercel. Harrier, look, wait, would you just can't, said Tercel. Harrier. Abruptly, Harrier stopped, spun around, and grabbed Tercel. He pulled him so close that their chins bumped for a moment, then spoke into his ear so softly that someone standing even a few paces away couldn't have heard. You know that Faunus is ready to bolt. Right now, the Karegi want to throw him out, but if these people keep acting like this, they won't. They'll go with him. And then Light knows who else will go with them, and the Niren will kill them. I know these people are afraid. I know they have no idea what's going on, but they have to stop acting as if they are in Arameth, and they have to stop right now. This kind of shocks Tercel, and I don't think that it should, but it does. He thought that Harrier was just being Harrier, just having a, not really temper tantrum, but losing his temper. He didn't realize that it was mostly a show to shock the Aramethans into doing what he says to keep all of the Isvi people together. Tercel absorbs this and plays along. He's just like, you can't tell me what to do. And they stage a play fight, which ends with Tercel kind of storming off in mocking. He's not doing it seriously. But he storms off and goes to Saravase, who talks with him a little bit about regrets, about how things aren't always what they seem, about how everything goes the way the wild magic says that it's going to go. And Tercel blurts out one of his biggest fears, which is that they're all going to die. And Saravasi lets him know that Harrier might not be right. Harrier is just as young as Tercel is. And, the premier quality of a night mage is that they are very, very stubborn and they will stick to an idea forever. I don't know if this comforts Tercel all that much, but it does at least get him to go and try to help get everybody packed up. Check. He goes over and he's like, all right, the people are at least mounted. They're riding, and that's kind of good. He thinks more about the trouble that the Aramethans have brought with them, and just how long he's been out in the Mandirian desert, and he's lost right now. They ride along for most of the day, and they stop for their midday rest, and Tercel is kind of grateful that the Aramethans don't actually know how to do much more other than stop their Shotars and start their Shotars. Because if they did, he figured that they would have been riding all up and down the caravan and exhausting themselves, because the very first thing they do when everybody stops is all pretty much as a group rush to find Harrier. Tercel thinks that he needs to stop them, and Shariah's like, why? They could rush up to where Harrier is going to see if there are any dangers in the sand, and if there are, then maybe we'll have a few less northerners around. Tercel doesn't really think that that's the best idea ever, but he starts heading out to stop them anyway. As Tercel saw the Aramethans approach, moving much too fast for the hammering heat, and in a tight-packed group that made Tercel think uncharitably of ducklings, he assumed that they would wait for Harrier to finish his conversation with Shariah and Liafa before asking all the questions that he knew that they must have. They didn't. I'm sorry, Magistrate Parazel said as soon as she reached them. I need to speak with Master Gillian now. She spoke with the quiet firmness of one used to being obeyed. You can mind your manners, girl, and hold your tongue until we are finished speaking with Harrier, said Liafa. And Liafa goes on speaking to Harrier about things that are probably much more important than whatever the Aramethans want to say. Unfortunately, that does not stop Magistrate Parazel from going on. I am tired of being put off, Magistrate Parazel snapped. She stepped even closer, and her clerk, Cave, put himself right at her elbow, just as Tercel stepped up to place himself between her and Liafa. Madam Magistrate, please, said Tercel. I appreciate your concern. Harrier really wants to speak to you. Harrier would probably rather have eaten broken glass if they had had any, but Tercel was trying to stop a fight, not start one. Right now, he and Umara Shariah and Umara Liafa are all trying to determine the best method to use in order to find the oasis, because Aniran destroyed everything in the Isvai and all the landmarks have shifted. We're lost, said Magistrate Parazel. No, said Tercel. Harrier just doesn't want to spend a lot more time looking for it than we need to. I see, she said, not sounding as if she did at all. Now, this is something I had wanted to bring up to him, but since you say you're an authority, I don't think that we should stop at this Sapathric oasis at all. In my opinion, it is a much better use of our resources to head directly to Arameth. That's nice, said Tercel. Magistrate Parazel sighed, as if Tercel were a very backward student who was missing the point. Lord Tercel, as the duly appointed representative of the Magistratum, founded by the High Magistrate Killarnan for the governance by law and justice of the 9 cities and all the lands which look to them for rule and care, I am taking charge of this, whatever it is. If you and Harrier would like to assist me, I'll be happy to take your advice under consideration, of course, but I really can't promise that either of you will continue to have the same degree of autonomy and authority. What's a sandwalker? Said Tercel. How do you defend an encampment against shamblers? What are Ashtaban Jari, and what do you do if you encounter one? How do you find water here? How do you keep livestock alive? What do you do if you are attacked by Bulwarta or goblins? If the Tabagana and the Karagi are arguing, whose side should you take and why? How do you make a Shotar move if it doesn't want to? How long can a Shotar go without water? Without food? What are the signs that a sandwind is coming, and what do you do? Who is an Iron? What does she want? How do you recognize her? How do you recognize her creatures? How do you stop her? Oh, and yeah, where are we exactly? Yes, Lord Tercel. You've demonstrated that you and young Master Gillian are necessary and useful. We really didn't have any intention of leaving you behind, you know. Leaving us behind, said Tercel. You may think you have reason to linger in this light-forsaken sandpit, but I assure you I don't. And the chief magistrate will be eager to receive our report. As everyone says, there is no reason to stop at this oasis at all. Just about then, Harrier joins them. And Harrier's like, all right, well, what's going on? Tercel just looks at him and says, Magistrate Parazel is taking over as supreme authority of the Isvi. She's willing to let us help. Oh, said Harrier, and he didn't even sound angry. He just sounded as if he couldn't imagine what he was supposed to say. Finally, he looked at Magistrate Parazel. You're planning on taking over the leading of the Isvi North? I am the appropriate authority to take charge here. Yeah, said Harrier. But the Omari, the tribal leaders, don't answer to councils. Although they would probably agree that Chief Magistrate Vonal was the High Umara of the 9 cities. Tercel tries to get Harrier to be serious, and Harrier's like, yeah, look, how about we go set up a tent and we can all sit down and find out what happened to you guys, and we'll decide who's going to lead who where once we do that. The tents get set up, and Harrier passes around the water skins because Bisochim is called the spring that he calls at every halt. And he looks at all of the Aramethans and he says, I know you're all scared. Coming in here, though, and trying to make this place into Arameth and make these people into Aramethans isn't going to make anything better. I'm sorry. There's a demon out there. If she can't be stopped very soon, it's going to be worse than in the time of Kellen all over again. Nobody knows that she's here but us. There's nobody we can tell. There's no way to get a message out. We can't kill her. Acacius Atreyu is 3 moon turns away from here, and from what you say and what we saw yesterday, everyone there is dead. I know that you think that Tercel and I are too young to be here doing this, said Harrier quietly. So do we. We've been saying that since the beginning. But you can't do any of this for us, or instead of us, or better than we are. If you try, and you don't have all the facts, you'll just get yourselves and a lot of other people killed. Tercel studies Harrier's face, and he knows that although Harrier is speaking very calmly and outwardly looks calm, he's probably really, really furious. The Aramethans, some of them, look a bit shaken up by these kind of bald facts stated at them, especially the youngest one, Cave, the one that Tercel kind of sort of knew back in Arameth, at least by reputation. But Harrier presses the point that he needs to know what happened back in Acacius Atreyu, back in the city. He needs to know what happened, and they fight a little bit because the Aramethans do not want to recount that. Can't say that I blame them for that. Reliving something that's probably very horrific doesn't seem like fun, but they do have information that Harrier needs. Magistrate Parazel she tells him a little bit about going down, going to the city, trying to figure out what was going on. She stops before she gets on to what happened and is like, you say that one of the Indarkened has returned. Fine. I'm not going to deny it. I believe you. I wish it were one of the Indarkened, said Harrier. We would at least know what it would take to kill it if it was. Anirin is an elemental spirit of darkness. Her offspring will be creatures much closer to the Indarken from the time of mages, but look, she usually attacks us a couple of times a day, and she hasn't hit us yet today, so what I need right now is everything that you can tell me about what happened in the city and how you got here. If you saw something we haven't seen yet, we need that information. Harrier asks, he even, not really begs, but he even is like, please, somebody start talking. There were more of us at first, said Cave. Cave, no, said Magistrate Parazel. No, madam, Heliphan, Harrier says that they need to know, and I need to know if I can tell anyone. She nods, and Cave tells the story, which I probably am going to relate in its entirety, although it is quite long. We were making ready to leave in 3 days, said Cave. Our messengers would be departing in the morning once the city gates opened. The sky was still light. It was, I think, 3 chimes before first night bells. An hour past what they call here in the South the first hour of night. I was making sure that the documents were properly packed and sealed for our journey and sealing up the preliminary report. I had just finished writing it. He stopped and stared off for a moment. Abel Traves, my assistant, came into my office and said that Madam Magistrate wanted me. She brought me to the roof of the council's palace. You can see the whole city. You could... He drew a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quicker, as if he meant to tell the tale and tell all of it. The council and some of his advisors were with her. I could see that the walls were filled with the city watch. The desert, past, was covered with people, thousands of them just standing there silently. The council said that the captain of the watch told him that they had simply appeared. At first, we all thought he had been drinking, not to have seen them approach, and we thought that these must be the brigands that the refugees had talked about. It was too dark to see them clearly. All we could see was that they were naked. After the captain ordered them to disperse, and they did nothing, no matter how many times he said it, Lord Felican suggested tossing down some torches. By now they were right at the walls. "It wasn't my fault," said Lord Felican. "No one is blaming you for this, my lord," said Magistrate Parazel. By then we had all gone to the wall over the main gate for a better view. The watch tossed the torches down, and the people burned. They burned like dry wood, and the fire caught and spread. In the light, we could see that they couldn't be alive. They were dead. They had been dead for moon turns. No one knew what to do. We had seen them walk up to the walls, and they were just standing there burning. The council ordered water to be brought to pour on them. We just couldn't. That was when we heard the watch blowing the horns on the other side of the city. Later, I spoke to a local woman. She had been close enough to see, and she said that a swarm of insects ate their way through the gates. They devoured them until no wood was left. Those things, you called them shamblers. They could walk into the city now, and they did. The ones on our side started walking along the wall, away from the main gate, even the ones that were still burning. All we knew at the time was that we had heard the alarm, but we didn't know what had happened. The council said that we should get back to the palace, and on our way there, a messenger reached us and said that the gates had been opened and the enemy was in the city. "You have to understand," said Cave. "We didn't know what they were. The city was full of refugees. The refugees were even sleeping in front of the consular palace because they had no place to go. The council offered us horses if we wanted to leave at once. He was going to send his whole family. We agreed to try. The only gate that would have been passable was the main gate. The streets leading to the others were all too narrow for horses and riders, and the shamblers were coming through them. We were mounted, waiting, but when the watch went to open the gates, they pulled the chains and insects poured on them. They screamed, and the bugs just kept coming. The horses began to panic. We abandoned them, and we ran back to the palace. I was the last one inside. The stones of the plaza were covered with a moving black, living tide, but you couldn't see where it ended, where one bug ended and the next began. Everyone outside died. Everyone who tried to cross the plaza died. The palace guard poured oil on the steps, and they guarded the entrance with torches, but they waited to set the steps on fire because there wasn't enough palace oil in the palace for them to do it more than 2 or 3 times. By morning, the city was quiet, and there was no sign of the insects. The council said that we had to try to escape. We went up to the roof. The city was still surrounded by the shamblers. All the city watch were standing with them. Some of the people, too. Because of that, we didn't think that there were any of them inside. We never did see any. We thought that with enough of us, we could fight our way through them. We went to the stables, and all of the horses, all of the animals were either gone or dead. For 2 days, we didn't see a single live animal anywhere in the city. We never saw any dead people. After 2 days, we tried to live. We started stashing up supplies, water, medicine. The Shamblers didn't come back into the city. We kept watch. The first day, some of the people went to the walls and they saw people that they knew outside. They went out to them, and when they got close, the Shamblers killed them. We tried to stop anyone from going out at first. After a while, we gave up. So, sounds like a Night of the Living Dead situation, and they aren't even in a mall. Not cool. Sounds stressful. Probably would have made me crazy. But he goes on. Actually, Lord Fellocan interrupts him and says, "That first night, we crammed as many people as we could into the council's palace. Antiques and civilization didn't matter in the face of the abominations out there. I hardly think that the Eternal Light would mind that we packed the rest into the Light Palace. It wasn't a restful night, but we managed. By the end of the second day, we were as prepared as we could be. Most of the trade-born had pushcarts or baskets, and those of us who could use them have swords. Everyone carried water. Yes, even I was reduced to the level of a miner's dray horse. We waited for dawn, and we headed for the eastern gate. No one wanted to try and risk opening the main gate again. It didn't work. Oh, the things let us walk out through the gate. Took us a while, too, and they kept on backing up all the while we were thinking that they might back up all the way to Arameth. And then when the last of us were out of the gate, more came walking in through it behind us. They had been in the city the whole time, watching us. And they lined up along the wall like militia on parade. We could have all cut our throats right there, but then we would have missed the opportunity to enjoy your charming company, wouldn't we?" Everybody is quiet, and Tercel thinks he could imagine the scene all too clearly. The cool of the early morning, the ranks of corpses, and here or there amongst the withered corpses, the bodies of those who had died in the first 3 days. And just when all the survivors had been preparing for a fight, more Shamblers surrounding them. "Abel screamed," said Cave. "She screamed. I knew that she was betrothed. Magistrate Vaughnell was supposed to witness her marriage. It was set for the 35th of harvest. She had been asking me ever since this started if I was sure we'd be back in time, and I had always said I was sure we would be. I shouldn't have lied. She ran at the Shamblers in front of us, and they killed her. She fell, and then she got back up. They killed, I don't know, 100 of us before we realized that we had to stay away from them whenever they approached. They started herding us like sheep, and they started walking, and we started walking. There were thousands of us, at first. We tried to help each other. The first day, that first Sen night, share food, share water, share blankets, but the days were so hot, and they didn't stop. They walked slow, but they didn't stop. And if you fell far enough behind, you'd touch one of them and it would kill you. After a few days, I think, they started to stop every now and then. I saw women carrying children fall down and nobody helped them. Nobody picked up the kids. I couldn't get to them. We left them behind. Cave began to cry, gulping painful sobs, staring at them as if he didn't even realize he was crying, till finally he put his hands over his face and he bent over his knees. "Is this what you wanted to know?" said Eugens. "Was it helpful? Was it fun?" "You don't ever get to ask me that, Jens. Not you. Just Tell me how the 8 of you survived a pleasant 1,000-mile walk without food or water with a bunch of shamblers as an escort." "We stole from the dead, what do you think?" said Lord Felican. "From the dying, from the living, if we could get away with it, and if they didn't look like they had much time. About 1,000 people died in the first Sen night, and I figured if I didn't want to join them, I needed to put aside all of my pleasant scruples and survive. You can thank me for your brother's life at your leisure." "You can thank me for your own any time you want," said Harrier. "I'm the one that told the Isvai that you weren't some new trap of an Iron's." Eugen shook his head, as if flies were buzzing around it. Now, now look here, Harrier. It's bad enough that Tercel," he stopped, looking angry and wary, "that Tercel's gotten sick in the head, raving about being Kellen come again like a flowering fair mock mage. Did you have to follow him?" Harrier smiled, and it wasn't a happy expression at all. "Actually, Jens," he said, his voice deceptively, frighteningly soft, "Kellen Tavadon was a night mage, a wild mage. Killarnan, first magistrate, was a high mage. Tercel's a high mage, too. If you want to complain about somebody thinking that they're Kellen come again, complain about me." He spread his hands a little way apart, and a ball of cold fire began to grow between them. It didn't glow very bright in the daylight, but it didn't have to. Everybody could see it. "If you ever get home again, congratulate Brelt for me. I'm not coming back. I'm not becoming harbor master after Da. I got the 3 books." And that pretty much ends the recital of what our Aramethans went through. It's it sounds brutal. I cannot even imagine. I mean, I would kind of imagine that both of the authors probably drew inspiration from actual historical forced marches, and it, yeah, yikes. There's a little bit more talk, mostly because Harrier had said if we get back to Arameth, and all of the Aramethans pounce on that. Harrier lets them know that there aren't any maps. All of the landmarks are gone. They think that they're going the right way towards the oasis, and that is something that they're going to have to do because they really aren't. They don't have food. They don't have wood to make arrows or to burn the shamblers with. And Lord Felican is like, "And what does this have to do with us?" And Harrier's like, "You have to make things easy. You have to listen to me. This is the best plan that I have. This is the best way that we can survive." Lord Felican says, "What, are you telling us that we have to go native?" He is definitely a piece of work. We'll just leave it at a piece of work. "Yes," said Harrier. "Something that you may not know, I didn't, is that the Isvani have no custom of charity. Water is free to anyone who asks. Food and shelter and transportation aren't. I've persuaded them to treat you as if you're Isvani. 31 people died rescuing you from the shamblers, so we do have resources available, but you had better do your best to fit in. Now come on." Tercel isn't sure if he's horrified by the fact that Harrier is treating both a noble and a magistrate as casually as he is, or if he kind of is maybe a little bit envious that Harrier feels he has the authority to do so. But they go on, and the Aramethans do not make anything any easier for everyone. Shariah has been watching all of this, and she thinks to herself about how different the Aramethans are. When the two Northerners, Tercel and Harrier, had first arrived at Abi Abadashar, Shariah had thought that they were a danger. It hurt Shariah's heart now to look back on the brief moon turns that she had spent there and look at that as an interlude of comfort and safety, when at the time it had seemed to her and all of the Nalzindar to be a time of constant fear. But one did not see the day for what it was, even when one was in the middle of it. The danger the two Northerners had brought with them was not one of discovery, but knowledge. Possessed of the knowledge that Tercel and Harrier brought with them, how could she have turned aside from helping them? And one act led to the next and the next, as one grain of sand upon the wind was joined by another and another until the sand wind blew. Had she turned her back on them and upon the star-crowned Enkeldar on that first day, perhaps the Nalzindar might even now be safe in Abi Abadashar. Perhaps Enkeldar would not have been lost. Perhaps the demon would now be set lane. Perhaps everything would be better, but perhaps it would be worse. Her father had always said that perhaps was a net thrown to trap the caster and not the prey. Shariah could not think of perhaps. She could only set the net of her thought against what was and what she had to work against. She thinks about how much Tercel and Harrier had tried to fit in, how much Harrier had given up every last thing that he had hoped, except that, maybe he could keep the Isvani alive. But she thinks that he's even given up that final hope. She thinks about how a Umara, a tribal leader, has to care for everyone and no one, and that blue robes, that the wild mages have to be even more of a tribal leader than the tribal leaders. And she had been so afraid that he would favor these Northerners. And, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if the Northerners had any wisdom, but she's pretty much convinced that they have absolutely no wisdom. They were like the yapping of the Paca as it tried to drive the desert lions from the goats. From the moment the Northerners had been roused from the healing trance, they had done nothing but whine and cry and shout and make demands. For food, for clothing, for such luxuries as even Chieftain Faunus in his greed couldn't imagine. And whenever they weren't doing that, they were flinging themselves into danger or thrusting themselves into the middle of the councils of the leaders as if their questions were of more importance than the need to find the way to the oasis. Their words held all the fear and foolishness of city dwellers, children, of those that claimed importance and pride of place just because they wanted it. Shariah does not have any clue how to deal with these people. And not knowing how to deal with them, she hopes that A, Harrier won't give in to them, but B, that they won't sway him either. She doesn't really know what to do, so she, in her very practical way, goes to sleep. And the next day, it's time to break camp, and Shariah thinks about it, and she's like, all right, the tent with the Northerners, we're going to strike that last. Let these annoying people sleep as long as they can. Harrier kind of gives them a little bit of more to worry about because they didn't get attacked yesterday, and Harrier's a little bit worried about that. They talk about all of the things that Aniron could throw at them. Um, Shariah says that she would rather fight shamblers than goblins, and who can blame her? But it's almost, it's almost time to go. And one of the Northerners, it's which one is it? I think it's Faunus. Yes, or not Faunus, Magistrate Parazel. Magistrate Parazel is washing her face, and Harrier kind of smacks the water out of her hands. Well, not the water. Smacks the wet rag out of her hands. And the woman is like, "What is wrong with you?" And Harrier's like, "We don't waste water." She asks Harrier, "How are they supposed to take a bath?" And Harrier's like, "You don't take a bath." Lord Felican follows Harrier out, and he's like, "You told us water was free." Harrier says, "I told you that it was freely given. In case you haven't noticed, we're in a desert. There are 6,900 people in this camp, including the 8 of you. There are 9,284 Shotars, 35 Akalas hounds, Saravase, and I honestly am not keeping count on the goats and sheep. Every single one of these creatures needs water. You don't need to be comfortable and get a bath." Lord Felican is furious, and Harrier has had it. In fact, Eugene's, Harrier's brother, is like, "Harrier, grow up. Lord Felican didn't mean any harm to you." And Harrier, he's done. He says, "Jens, if you tell me that he or any of you have suffered so much, I swear in the name of the eternal light, I will leave you all right here. You're alive. The people that you see here are all of the Isvani left, except for a few kids that we're all hoping are hidden too well for Aniron to find. We left the Lake of Fire about the same time that you left Acacius Atreyu. We had 11,000 people then. And this time last year, I think there were about 18,000 Isvani, if you had counted them all from all the tribes. And the 4,108 people who have died in the last 3 moon turns, I've watched most of them die. And I tried to save them. And right now I'm trying to save all of you. So why don't you just shut up and let me do it?" This doesn't sit well with Eugene's. I mean, big brothers dealing with little brothers never deal well. And he takes a big swing at Harrier, who ducks out of the way and is like, "Look, I'm not fighting you. We're leaving." And they do. The Northerners obviously don't have much choice. I mean, they can't exactly go without. And that it goes on for a few days like that. Until, well, as it says right here, the beginning of their great trouble was almost serene. When they stopped to make night camp, Leofa offered to take the 3 northern women into her tents so that a comb might be found for Pelican's hair, and maybe it could be combed through and braided. They are just kind of trying their best. The Isvai people don't like these Northerners, but they are trying their best to deal with them. And the Northerners are not helping matters. In fact, Shariah can hear them through the walls of the tent because they don't seem to realize that they're in a tent. One of the women says, "How can they possibly expect us to survive eating nothing more than a mug of broth? They have sheep and goats, herds full of them. My love, you must explain to them that expecting anyone to ride for hours with nothing more than cold soup is cruel and heartless. I'm sure they don't have to. Oh, I will be right back. Sorry about that. Had a neighbor come to the door. Anyway, the Northerners are definitely complaining. They think that the Isvani people are hoarding supplies. Shariah and her friends who are out there drinking their mug of broth are like, here, come, sit down. This is a delicious feast that we are having. Enjoy the roast goat and, everything. Shariah also thinks that the Northerners shriek like the tiny fur-covered men that were in the trees of Abi Abadashar. Harrier's like, you mean the monkeys? No, they're not shrieking like the monkeys. Not till maybe tomorrow, when they realize that we really do expect them to get up an hour before dawn and ride, or the day after that when they're really stiff and sore, and they realize that none of us are actually sitting down to roast mutton and that nobody cares. I am sorry for your sake that they are not more grateful for the gift of their lives, said Cinnarin. Harrier shook his head. It would be nice if they were, and I know all of them have been asking me to understand, and I'm really sick of it, but the thing of it is, Tercel and I spent a year and a half getting used to the whole idea of demons and magic bit by bit as things got worse and worse. They just came down to Acazius Atreyu, and the next thing they knew, they were being marched across the desert by an army of shamblers while everyone around them died. And Arameth, you could go your whole life there and never see somebody die. You could live there your whole life and never be too hot or too cold or thirsty or hungry or ever in danger. It's just the way things are there. They want to go back. They don't want to hear that they can't. They're afraid. They're soft, said one of the Isvani. They're different, that's all, said Harrier. Thandat, if you had never heard of Bisuchim or Anirin or any of this, and 1,000 shamblers had come into the tents of the Nalzindar one night, what would you have done? The tribesperson bowed their head and said, I will think upon your words and seek their wisdom. And Harrier's like, that's not what I meant. But fine, think about my words if you want. It's common sense, not wisdom. And that's pretty much where the chapter ends, with the Aramethans still causing problems. Harrier, well, he understands where they're coming from. He also probably wants to smack them upside the head. But at the same time, being honest enough to tell the Isvai that they might not do any better if they had been suddenly dropped into the situation. Anyway, that is where we are going to leave it today. Sorry about the weird pause in the middle of that, but I actually have to go help my neighbor once I finish getting this all set up and getting it uploaded so that you guys can actually watch it in 2 hours. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope any of that made sense. Be kind to yourself today. Be kind to all of your neighbors. And big hugs to everybody. I will see you guys all next time. Please be sure and leave me a thumbs up if you don't mind. It does always give me at least a ghost of a smile, and I will see you next time.